Well, whenever you read a finance magazine, ask yourself this question: how would they know? The very same people who didn't predict the global financial crisis are the very same people who are being called upon to explain what's happening with everything from global growth to green shoots to interest rates.
But I do think that this is mostly a localized problem and not something that's going to affect the national economy.
Perhaps a better way of looking at economic trends is through what's known as the magazine cover index. I was recently emailed a cover of a prominent American business magazine that has a very funny cover, which, when you look at it, as you normally would, it says why the market will keep going up. But if you turn the magazine cover completely 180 degrees upside down, it has an alternate headline that says why the market's going nowhere. To explain the magazine cover index, I'm delighted to announce the return of my completely unpaid contrarian investor, Mr. Chris Leithner from Leithner & Associates. Chris, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Just explain what the magazine cover index is.
It's a somewhat irreverent economic indicator. It's sometimes taken seriously, and indeed sometimes it's taken extremely seriously. It basically says that the cover story of major business magazines, you mentioned Business Week just now, also The Economist.
Well, actually, I didn't mention it. I tried not to mention it anyhow.
The ABC surely on occasion can't be completely anti-competitive and can say there exist other media outlets out there.
Yes.
Whether it's Business Week, The Economist, Forbes, Fortune, those are major American ones.
Yeah.
That the covers can not just not reflect reality, but they reflect anti-reality. That's to say, if they say the sky is, if the weather is sunny and the economic conditions are very good, then take cover, and vice versa. Now,
they reflect groupthink, Chris Leithner, in a sense.
In a sense, groupthink, but also in a sense, positive think. Perhaps it's human psychology that people after bad conditions or about of bad things happening, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And you mentioned, I think, an absolutely critical point, that folks in central banks and governments who had no inkling whatsoever that bad things were occurring are now, without a hint of smile on their face, without a skerrick of embarrassment, are purporting to tell people that, look, the economic, the skies are becoming blue, or there might be a wee bit of this and that and a few misfortunes coming our way. But the record as forecasters is utterly and totally abysmal, and yet they purport to have a crystal ball.
Tell me, what is the worst case scenario? So we have so many economists coming on our air and saying, oh, this is a bubble and it's going to burst and this is going to be a real issue for the economy. Some say it could even cause a recession at some point. What is the worst case scenario if, in fact, we were to see prices come down substantially across the country?
Well, I guess I don't buy your premise. It's a pretty unlikely possibility. We've never had a decline in house prices on a nationwide basis.
Can you give us your view as to whether or not there is a housing bubble out there?
Well, unquestionably, housing prices are up quite a bit. I think it's important to note that fundamentals are also very strong.
So we expect moderate growth going forward.
We've got demographics supporting housing growth.
There's a reasonable possibility that we'll see some strengthening of the economy sometime during the middle of the year.
We've got restricted supply in some places.
There's not much indication at this point that subprime mortgage issues have spread into the broader mortgage market, which still seems to be healthy.
The most famous example was a cover of Business Week, the same magazine you mentioned, perhaps you shouldn't have just a second ago. Back in 1979, the title of the cover was "The Death of Equities." That's to say, the death of stocks. It basically was in effect saying, look, never buy a stock again because the stock market has gone down for years and years and years. That was on the cover because then at that stage, people at dinner party conversations and would talk about anything except the stock market. The point was reached when grandparents would talk about their grandchildren rather than their stock portfolios. In other words, things had got to such what was perceived to be a hopeless stage that it was perceived to be completely safe to put that on the cover. That's to say, well, that's a very uncontroversial cover. No one's going to complain about it. No one's going to contest it. And when things go to that stage, when everybody lines up on one line of an argument, on one side of an argument, when people think to themselves, no one could possibly dispute whatever it is we're putting on our cover, it's at precisely that point that the gods decide to smite us all and say, well, in actual fact, reality is quite different. Now, that's a far cry from a theory, but I think the point you raised about groupthink is a good one, that when so many people believe a single thing, reality has a habit basically of kicking us in the backside.
Why should people invest against the cycle?
I'm not saying that people should invest against or invest for it. What I am saying is that people should ultimately think for themselves. Imagine if everyone did think
There's a
for
revolutionary
themselves.
idea.
It is a preposterously revolutionary idea.
It'll never catch on.
It'll never catch on. But remember, again, returning to your point, it was, and I've got the quote here, I refer to it not every day, but every once in a while. A man who purports to have a crystal ball, none other than Glenn Stevens of the RBA, literally weeks before the world blew up in the middle of 2007. This is a quote from a testimony he gave to the House of Representatives. Looking ahead, there does not seem to be a high likelihood of the world economy slowing abruptly in the near term. Hence, the external forces at work will in all likelihood continue to be pretty positive. Australian households overall appear to have plenty of disposable income and the confidence to spend it. Business profits are in good shape and firms will be well placed to continue their high levels of investment as needed, etc. etc. What I'm getting at is at the time he made that utterance, no journalist queried it. Indeed, I dare say very few investors queried it. That's what people wanted to hear. I dare say it's a very sincere statement. That's what he truly believed. What I'm simply getting at, or in response to your question, is that if people thought for themselves, they would ask questions to say, well, is what person X says really true? Does he give evidence for it? Does he have a rationale for it? Are there grounds for me to believe it? And with so many things, you have to ask yourself, well, gee, there are question marks there. We can't say with any degree of certainty that what person X says is so and what person Y says is so. So the appeal, if you like, is for thousands upon tens of thousands, millions of people to think for themselves rather than take a cue from a single person or a small committee of bureaucrats in Canberra. The likelihood that what does Canberra know that anybody, I mean, have they run a household? Have they actually met a payroll? Honestly, what does anyone in Canberra know about real life?
Because all of the discussion today, Chris Leithner, has been about whether there will or won't be an interest rate rise tomorrow. Yes. A decision, at least, by the Reserve Bank of Australia. And of course, we all think, well, what does this mean? This is an indicator for something. But your argument is it's an indicator for not very much at all.
Well, that's right. There's noise from day to day. Bigger question to say, gee, isn't it odd that relative to other points in time, the rates on offer are exceptionally low. Now, people will jump in and say, but they're higher here than they are in America and England.
Yeah, we've got the highest interest rates in the world at the moment.
Indeed, which just leads me to very slightly reformulate the question, why on earth is it that rates are so exceptionally low? Has it to do with central bankers who have taken a sledgehammer to these sorts of things? And what they're basically doing is inducing people to make it seems to me, to make all manner of very bad investment decisions premised upon the fact that, rates are low, they're going to remain low, they can only get lower until there's something that occurs, flies out of the blue, and when rates rise and people find themselves in budgetary problems. We're having similar discussions roughly 2.5 years ago, when great concern to do with rises. In a free market, when individuals can think for themselves, buy and sell as they please, rates will rise and fall according to the amount of money that lenders are willing to extend and the amount that borrowers are willing to borrow, without politicians stepping in and in effect bludgeoning bankers over the head to say thou shalt reduce rates in order to favour a particular class of society, namely people who are up to their eyeballs in mortgage debts, and thereby penalise another sector of society, self-funded retirees who are trying to live off the proceeds of their savings.
So the takeaway message from this tonight is that no matter what happens tomorrow, you can't predict the future. Think for yourself.
Precisely right. Well put.
Chris Leithner, thank you very much.
Great pleasure.